I'm Anthony Coppage, and I am talking to you today about the qualitative feedback in a quantitative way, which is a fun way of saying how do we make feedback lead to actionable change. And I've developed a way to do that that I think is clever, and it's certainly been effective at IBM where I work, called the Retrospective Radar. And shortly, I'll be sending a link here in chat for each one of you to join me on a Mural board. Mural is a whiteboard slash interactive, collaborative, all together space. It'll be a free link for you to come on in. And I'll be posting that just briefly here. But I do have 9 slides, exactly 9 slides to get through, because I did want to give just a tiny bit of context to say, what was the thinking that led to the thinking? I think that that's actually pretty helpful. So with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and begin with that. And we'll just go right into the PowerPoint. Again, 9 slides only to begin, and then we're going to go play and have fun. And I invite you to come join me on that. So I'm going to start and end with this slide. And it's really about the idea that I have been fascinated with of when strategy comes down, how do we alter that strategy based on the feedback? So I had this idea of how do we have feedback lead to change? And I love this simple visualization of the leadership strategy cycle where they roll out new strategy. And the idea is that someone's thought of something, people have thought about something, and they want to go to market with it. They want to try and see how that works. And often that just gets left. It's like on autopilot after the strategy's set. But like all things Agile, I think the idea of iterative, learning, measurable matters. And so the strategy should be just as much open to change as the actual people's work doing the tactical piece. So this just represents that visually. And I'm going to come back to it again, 9 slides only, just to keep it clean. There's a phrase here that I love, and it's from my friend and coworker Andrew Burrows, who says, strategy cascades down and feedback should flow back up. And in an Agile environment that we're trying to create this culture of sharing and of trying to improve continuously, I like the quote that Andy says. Andy Stanley says, we don't drift in good directions, we discipline and prioritize ourselves there. Now, I like discipline and prioritization because it's a way to understand if it's more like this and less like that, right? What I like about it is it's intentional. There's the intention to do something and there's the intention not to do something, and both are valuable. So what we need to figure out is, are we having cascading strategy and feedback flowing up? Well, a lot of the Agile practices don't really let us understand that. If you think of in the world of Scrum, where you would have a retrospective, or if you look at a cumulative flow diagram in Kanban, what you get is a way to understand workflow and work process, but nothing about those charts and nothing about that insight says if it was the right work. It just says it was work. And so there can be Scrum teams, for example, that get very efficient in their story points. Man, they know exactly how many story points they can do, and they get really optimized. And then they don't deliver value, right? They deliver something, but that's the idea of outcomes over outputs. So I like this quote from Galileo. Measure what is measurable and make measurable what is not so. And that second half of the sentence is what I find fascinating. This is the barometer. So if measure what is measurable, think of thermometer. If I take my temperature and it's 98.6 degrees, I have a very specific understanding about my body temperature at that moment in time. A barometer is similar. It does actually check it has a number, an air pressure, 29.97, for example. That's great, but what makes a barometer wonderful is that you take those measurements over time, and eventually you get to a place where you understand trends and patterns, and you can do things like predict whether it's going to rain or not to some level of certainty. So I want to understand that. And what I want to get to is, how do we know if we're doing this the right way? In my mind, the biggest way to understand this is to understand that if we're really serious about change, then we have to make it psychologically safe. And we know this because this is taught to us in all our coaching classes and our credits for IC Agile and Scrum Alliance. But ultimately, do we really go create that? I think the 2 ways to do that I've been learning and continuing to apply is to highlight dissonance. So if we're supposed to be going here and what people are saying is we're not really going there, I actually want to highlight that. And then I want to encourage courageous feedback. And I actually want to uplift that. I want to give that a place, and I want to give that an opportunity so that people feel that their feedback leads to change. So we look at these different dimensions to say, how are we doing with our clarity? Are we aligning, and where do we have that? This is the beginning of telling the truth. When you start telling the truth like this in your organization, you start changing the culture. And Agile is a culture play. So if you change the culture, change anything. But if you do not change the culture, most things won't last. Most things won't stick, because behavior modification rarely lasts. And if it is, it's usually through some sort of compliance, which would be anti-Agile. So I come back to, are we doing it the right way? Psychological safety. Here, what we've been doing is I've been doing this through feedback. We do this with what's called an Agile Health Radar, where we understand over time what are the 8 dimensions of health. Then we do our Net Promoter Score. How likely are you to recommend somebody to come work in your team, department, etc. And then we talk about how their feedback matters. Well, this was all great stuff, but it was not landing all the time. And it happened way before my time at IBM, where I've led the transformation for Agile digital sales and now in Agile marketing. So I want to figure out not as just feedback as a gift, but how do we make feedback essential? This is a great quote from Ed Batista at Stanford. And I like what he talks about, that this is about aligning and achieving goals inside those working relationships. That direct feedback is the most efficient way for people to gather information and learn from it. So that requires some level of empathy. Because if you're going to create a relational construct where it's not just what did you do, but who are you and how are you doing that, then we have to build some sort of empathy into that process. At IBM, we would say respect, openness, courage, empathy, and trust are the 5 values we lean into, where for our Agile transformation, our OCET, respect, openness, courage, empathy, trust. If it doesn't feel like all 5, you have the right to say something, because that would say we're probably not being Agile, we're probably doing Agile. So we have to make this safe, and we have to find out how to make feedback essential, because I wanted to create significant change. During this time, I also was able to look at different tools. So I really like design thinking. This systems thinking, I think Mike was just talking about this. I like actions leading to results, which shape future actions, which lead to new results. I really like the causality piece, but I also like the correlation. And so how do we do that with, well, we do work boards, right? So if it's a Kanban board or you're in Jira or whatever, there's a way to create visibility, not only around the work, but then around the feedback loops. And so I looked through different ways to visualize this and understand this. And what I was missing was a way to scale it. Because IBM is huge, one of the things that my boss would always task me with is not, is this thing a good idea, but does it scale? And we have to figure out how to scale to make things really implement well in an organization of our size. So these were all things I did to learn, and they were very, very helpful. So I came to a place of saying, that's all great, but then what's the impact? So we use a very simple impact matrix to say, look, what is the stuff that is the highest impact and the lowest effort? Let's identify what that is. And there are thresholds we can do that, feedback being chief among them, to understand what's working and what's not. We should do more of the low-hanging fruit, the things that deliver value to our clients, business partners, and of course our bottom line. But if it doesn't do all 3, is it really high value? So we have to think about that. Is it low effort and low impact? Should we even do it anymore? And if it's low impact and high effort, how do you not just eliminate it? How do you ruthlessly eliminate that? So we had to create the safety and the opportunity to identify where things were, the work we were producing, the outcomes we were trying to achieve, the outputs that were being done. Were we getting there or not? And how do we talk about that in a safe way? So going back to the initial thing, and I told you there's only 9 slides before we go play, this was where I was trying to get to. How do we make this operational? One of my favorite people to listen to is Simon Sinek. And Simon is pretty genius at a number of things. One of the things I think Simon does well is he is what I would call an aspirational optimist. But his real genius is he knows how to operationalize aspirational optimism. And using that kind of as a springboard for thinking in all this that I've done, I was trying to figure out how do we get there. So I started MVP. Agile is all about minimum viable product. And for me, what's the first thing we can do? Well, let's ask. So we do, if you were to inspect the work that I do at IBM, and you're all Agilists, so if you were to come in and see what I was doing, you would probably give it the label Lean Scrum Bond, if you were to look at the way I've set it up. Yep, that would be a good definition for it. I would never use that term internally because it wouldn't matter to the groups I'm working with, but that would be the hybrid approach that we've taken. Some of the work is planned, but a lot of it is interrupt driven. How do you manage that tension well? And how do you keep the tail from wagging the dog, proverbially speaking? So what I decided was, well, there's got to be a way to help them prioritize first. We had begun with Stephen Covey's circles of control, influence, and concern. Let's go to how it works. Stephen Covey came up with a thing that said, what is it that you can manage? What can you control that you don't need anybody's permission? You just don't do it. And you are empowered. You have full agency to go do that. Well, it should be the largest chunk of your work, actually. But then there are things that you can't control. You can only maybe influence. Or if you can't influence, who could influence it before you? Very, very common. That's going to be a manager or a supervisor or a boss of some type, whether that's a product owner, scrum master, whatever. There's going to be somebody who has more influence or a different level of influence than you do. And so that's a form of feedback. Then the third is concern, where, look, manager's not going to solve that we have to do these two different systems and it's legacy hardware and legacy software, and it's slow and antiquated, but until we improve it, it's kind of what we're stuck with. And the larger the enterprise, the more true that ends up being. There's a lot of legacy in enterprise. And so what we wanted to do was say, how do we create a way to act on that? And introduced myself to Pat Kua. So Pat, who I've met with, created this Starfish. And the Starfish goes beyond the retrospective, what went well, what did not go well. He actually breaks it down into, of what you're discussing, of what you're learning, how are you going to prioritize for your very next sprint or for your next iteration? And he says there's 5 ways to do that. You can start doing something, you can stop doing something, you could do less of something, you could do more of something, or you could just keep doing it. And those are your 5 options. So it became an easy way to prioritize beyond the what went well, what did not go well. It was actionable. And I really like that because that's a very helpful way to think about not all work is equal in value. So how would I prioritize my own work? But in this Covey model, I realized the overlay made the most sense. And so I created this. So we're in Mural now, and I'm going to go ahead and share this link with you guys. Let me put the visitor link into chat so you can come play. And chat, paste. Feel free to join me here. This is a tool where I have the ability now to say to the reps, when you do your retrospective, which is over here on the left, what's delivering value? What's not delivering value? What can you change and how can you adapt? They come in prepared by getting this link before the meeting happens. And they would come up and grab a sticky note. So I invite you to do that with us, to come up and grab a sticky note of your favorite color and just drag it down onto the retrospective portion right below. You'll notice that Mural acts very much like a whiteboard. So a sticky note, if you were to have a little sticky note and you walk up to a whiteboard, you'd have to walk to the whiteboard to be able to read it. Same thing true with Mural. In order to do that, I will click on the sticky note. And the second option here in the little menu that I'm showing is zoom to sticky note. When I do that, it lets me, as if I walked up to the whiteboard. I'm going to right click and edit, and I'm going to say what went well for me this week was I was able to conduct 3 trainings on Retro Radar successfully within 1 hour. 2 S's. That went well for me. So I invite you to come join me and grab anything you want, grab any color you want, and put on here what's gone well for you. How did you deliver value so far this week or last week? And then what did not go well? Because it's helpful to actually understand not just the positive, but how do we change the negatives? Well, let's figure that out. So I invite you to come join me here. And again, the link is right there in chat. And talk about something that did not go well. Did not have time to prioritize Jira training, for example. And so what ends up happening is we have people come down and grab the sticky notes, add them here, which I invite you to come do with us, come play, and then to talk about what What went well and what did not go well. One of the things about this is I didn't want the reps to feel like they had to do a stand and deliver of what did the 12 things you did last week. Gosh, that's maybe useful for you as a personal retrospective, but it doesn't help us all get better. What helps us is sharing the things that are valuable for all of us to understand. So if you found a better way to do a thing that we all have to do, that'd be worth sharing. If you had something that was in your way and you found a way around it, that would be worth sharing. And what we're trying to get is the rising tide floats all boats. Because in a sales organization or a marketing organization or HR, any space where it's not just sit down and write code, sit down and work on a project, when it's interrupt driven, when you've got that dynamic nature, you've got a lot of individual contributors. They're grouped functionally, but they don't act as much like the traditional team you would see in Agile, where you would say these three people are working together to accomplish this thing towards this larger bit of work, right? Stories and epics. Instead, we had to figure out how do we have a rising tide float all boats? How do we have people come up and figure out what's working, what's not, and share that knowledge together? So at a squad by squad or team by team level, we were able to do this very successfully. Now, this came about because I was trying, remember, to solve how do I have this feedback? How do we start getting us better at scale? And one of the things I knew was we had to have a way to bring it all together. Now, at the time, I was starting this right before COVID. So I'd been working with the teams for 6 months, approximately 5.5 months. And I rolled this out to a pilot group of 4 teams and said, let's try this. And 2 weeks in, it was really clear this worked very, very well. 3 weeks later, COVID happens and offices start shutting down. Well, these are people that are used to literally sitting around in a bullpen area and working through things together when they're not, making calls or doing their jobs. So this was a boon for us. So instead of having to hit pause or stop and pivot like so many companies did, so many people did, our team has just put a comma in the sentence and kept going because we already created a way to work. This just really underscored that the sharing of that became very doable even in a work from home remote situation. And so we rolled this out to everybody. So I had 26 squads, average of about 9 people, 8 to 9 people each, doing this once a week, every week. And what we found was that there was a lot to learn from and amongst the squads, within a squad, but also across squads. But because they didn't ever meet together, there was no sharing of that insight until we had a way to visualize it. And this is what we did. We would meet and go through the retrospective and talk about what went well. And if someone said, hey, that set up an archive process in the first test and learns that Carl put in there, Carl, that's a pretty great idea. Actually, I need to do that too this week. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to put my initials on it. I'm going to drag it over here to the what can we change? What can we get better? Carl solved something. I'm now going to put my initials on that, and that's going to be mine. In a future version of Mural, your initials will be toggleable as attached on the bottom right corner, so you'll know whose it is, but that's not quite rolled out. And then what we do is we say, okay, we've discussed this, we've come through this part, and now we move them over. So we would drag it. I like what Carl did. He shared that this was super valuable, so I'm going to start doing that this week. And so by putting it in the circle of control, that's areas that I can influence and do without anybody giving me permission. I just go do it, no permission needed. I can choose to prioritize to start doing that. I might take something that went well for myself and do more of that again the next week. So I would keep doing that next week for myself. And so what you start doing is dragging from left to right. From here, or duplicating, you're actually adding onto the radar what's working and what's not. And people are starting to share that insight inside the team. But they also have the ability to say, what's a problem was this thing was actually a problem for me. And because of this, I think our manager we need to do less of that. That was problematic. So I'm going to talk to our manager about, hey, I know we have a requirement around this, but here's the issue. I think we should do less of that. Or in this situation, someone's talking about a problem with our software. Well, the manager can't solve that, but the senior leadership sure could. So we actually put it in stop doing and circle of concern. So now the senior leadership is going to get feedback about something that the reps are saying systemically we should stop doing. And that's generally the idea week in and week out as we do this. I'm going to pause to say, are there any questions so far?
Yes.
All right.
Um, so my first question is, what's the feedback from the workers? Because it seems like you've actually given them Agile, or the intent of Agile, which is to give them greater control
Yes.
over production, and also the ability to influence inputs and outputs.
Absolutely, Earl. And that's exactly what they found was the first thing they discovered was some of the work they were doing wasn't very valuable, but they didn't feel they had a choice. Now, funny thing is they weren't saying to anybody, I wish I didn't have to do this. They were just begrudgingly doing some of the work, right? But when we started to visualize it, it became, well, why are you doing that? Well, I thought I had to. Well, gosh, if that's not working, we don't want you to do that. Really? So that you freed them, right, a psychological safety to say, no, we want you to talk about it. That was one of the first discoveries. An early win was I had a team. We had a client team where one of our huge clients would buy from us, and we had this internal process for some security software that they would buy it. And there was another huge company, so there was a lot of internal work around helping them get this purchased and then into their system. And our reps knew of a problem where if it wasn't put in the system just right, that it had errors and it wouldn't go through. And so everybody knew that was an issue, but they just kind of lived with it. And so I was talking with them and they were saying, hey, how can we solve this? Like, I'm tired of dealing with this thing that keeps coming up. And so we had the idea. They're using Trello to visualize their work and workflow. So we just added a custom field and said, every time you have an issue like this, just put a count next to your initials for all the reps on the team. And then we'll just count up and see how many they were. Of course, we know based on the CRM, which issues those were, so we could track them. And within 3 weeks, we had enough data to go back and say, it happens this frequently, it's happened this often, and it has this much impact on billing that you can't bill for, and an application that they can't run, and here's the delay. So there was a sudden impact assessment. We had a way to understand not the complaint, but the actual data around the problem. And it turns out it's millions of dollars. So it was like, wow, why don't we solve that? So we took the data, 2 weeks later, it's solved. Now that led to, oh my gosh, you're listening to my feedback, and we got more and better feedback. And because of that success, other teams are seeing and hearing about this, and they're like, well, I want that. And so it kind of snowballed and added. The more control we gave them, the more autonomy, the more we pushed authority all the way down to them, the more they responded and the better the outcomes. Slowly at first, but greater over time. And remember, I'm doing a lean scrum bond. So one of the things I'm teaching them is if we can get 1% better per week, every week in 50 weeks with a 2-week vacation, we're 50% better. And I don't care who CFO you work for, they're very happy about a 50% improvement, right? So what we wanted to do was just show it's bite size and it's iterative and we can experiment and test and validate. So yeah, that was a huge, huge learning. And yes, it does free them to then come and say even more. The other thing we learned at the bottom of this, you'll see, Carl, that I gave them a way to say this. They would write, such and such sucks. Okay, great. I have no idea what to do with that feedback. Thank you for saying you don't like it, but that doesn't help me understand. So we said, okay, what is the issue? Why is that important? And what is the ask? And if you'll notice, that's a disguised user story. That's need to, so that successful win, right? So we just gave them a way to describe it because when I first started on this, when I was looking for ways, we just said, during the retrospective, capture everybody's verbatims in Excel, throw them to a box folder, and we will run it all through Watson Natural Language Processor and parse that unstructured text data. It's as painful as you'd think, and it wasn't very effective. We still do that now, but because they give us a little bit of structure, guess what? That insight is actually pretty tremendous now. So we still use Watson Natural Language Processor because we have Watson, we're IBM, right? And we actually can tell you the emotion, the sentiment, the frequency, the patterns, all of that is visible across all squads. So what we were able to do is get better feedback. Not only were we able to start getting more feedback, the quality of feedback increased and the trust increased, which meant we were infusing a new culture. My friend, yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
Going back, that was kind of one of my questions as far as the feedback loop was concerned. And you said that, I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, hey, they started listening to us, we're getting more. Was the feedback loop there before? Was it broken? Were people being actively ignored?
Yeah, good, great questions. I would imagine it's like every company, because it's happened. I've been in multiple companies too, Mike. And you know what? Everybody can go to their boss. Everybody does have a way to push things up line. There's always been a way. Whether that's been codified or not depends on each team and each culture, right? Each company. But yes, there's always been a way, but never with data, never with insight. So we were able to take qualitative feedback and quantitatively understand it so that we could tell a story and not just have a complaint. There's the difference.
Can I ask a question then for the people that don't have Watson? Can we still use this without Watson? Because
of course you can.
Lots of people can't afford to run an AI to do their pattern analysis.
Yep. You're correct. And what I would say is there is actually a you can go to Watson Natural Language Processor right on IBM.cloud and you can get started for free. So everything I can do, you can do in the free version. But that's kind of a bonus for us. And I'll come back to that in a little bit, Carl.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not necessary, it's a bonus. What's amazing is that with Mural, we were able to export the data. So what would happen is I realized that I have feedback happening in the outer rings and I have actions happening in the center ring. So the center rings this is what the rep's choosing to work on. Because there's 5 rings here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments in this influencer ring, I can tell you that I know the hex code value for that color. I'm changing the background colors. I want you to notice what I'm doing. And what I'm really getting at is by having different colors that are always assigned to each segment, I now have a way to export the data. So when I go like this in Mural, I just highlight all, right click. I can either send it to GitHub or download the CSV. And if I download the CSV, guess what it gives me? This right here. I get the ability to see what was the actual verbatim text, and I'll zoom in quite a bit here. What did they say? What was that background color? Because that becomes a mappable thing now. We can actually start to parse. Everything with this color must have come from circle of concern, stop doing, right? And we were able to then say in what date and who it came from, right? So we could do that level of detail, which leads me to this. So we had the ability to say, we have lots of different teams. And what I wanted to understand was what was the feedback? We do count control, that's what they're choosing, but it's not feedback. So influence for the manager, concern for the leader, and then we can say across all the team, what kind of feedback do we get? So here's the aggregate total over all these months of the total feedback. You can see which teams give us the most by breakdown. You can see which teams give what percentage of the breakdown is for the senior leadership feedback, 35% versus 65% for the managers. And you can even see where they're screaming at us. Please stop the pain. Less of this. These things aren't helpful. These things are in the way. And they're telling us exactly what's in the way. But notice the second highest value of their feedback is start doing. You know what that says? We have ideas. We actually think we have good ideas that would help us if you would listen. And so we're trying to make that very actionable here. And then the coolest part is we now show them where their feedback is leading to change. Yep, we actually say, I can tell you exactly how many of the pieces of feedback down to a team-by-team basis have been started, under consideration, in progress, escalated, completed, declined, or they're just a duplicate, right? And we share this on a team-by-team basis. So if I'm the DevOps team leader, and all I am is the leader for that team, maybe I'm a Scrum Master, I can click on Circle of Influence, which that's just for me, right? And that's my team. And now when I scroll down, I can see the breakdown of the percentages, but guess what? I can get the actual verbatims. Now, I have replaced the data with Laura Ipsum, right? So we got a lot of Latin over here, but that's the real way it works, is we can say by date, by team, what were you asking for? And then the manager can mark it. Was that complete? Not started? Under consideration, right? We're actually making feedback actionable on a team-by-team, line-by-line basis. But remember, we're also able to see it at scale across the entire organization all at once. And we can see these patterns and trends.
Sure. That's a question there, because you're now shifting this huge level of work onto managers and detail that they weren't really dealing with before. How have you supported them so they're not wiped out?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, Carl, it's not actually a ton of work, because each week this retrospective radar right here, this export is normally for the managers, there's maybe 3 to 6 cards total. Sometimes there's none. So each week they have to spend about 5 minutes going in and deciding what the answer is. Can they work on that? Can it be escalated? So it really is literally a few minutes each week for a manager to get this and do that. Now, over time, it's hundreds of pieces of data that the manager has touched, but you're only taking a bite size each week. Where it gets a little bit heavier lift is with the second level or business unit executive, where you would say, hey, of all of the teams that are in your span of care, so if there's 26 teams, there are 7 leaders above that have a span of care. Yes, they are going to be then meeting with those and understanding within their span of care what's the feedback. And once a month, I did spend 45 minutes bringing them together to go, what are the patterns and trends each one of you are seeing? And let's have some aha sharing here, because we can solve for the entire organization if we would create that. That was an extra ask right there. And it took them, again, that 45 minutes plus another 10 or 15 minutes a week for each one of them. And that's about it. So I had no complaints from anybody about the time, because the value of the insight was exponentially greater than the small time investment. I mean, it's been a game changer. So those few minutes here and there, really not a big deal. And they're doing the retrospective anyway. We just made it visual and easier. And it has a lasting thing. So what we do is when we're done, we come in, change the color to this, and then share. This link just goes to a box note, and there's a running list of every Mural retrospective your squad's ever done, and we have a running history. But again, because you take a little bite each week, it's not that hard. Other questions? I see other people on the call, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. I'm here for you. I want to have fun and enjoy this time with you, so. Go ahead, Milton. Well, I see you unmuted, but I don't hear you. So feel free to use chat if you need to. Sheila, Christine, do y'all have any questions so far? Nothing so far? Okay. I will share that the retrospective radar, this what you're looking at on the screen here, exists in Mural inside IBM today. But I have submitted this to Mural so that it will be posted as an overall template. So anybody with Mural will have access to this exact template and be able to do whatever you want with it. So that's coming shortly. Other questions?
Is there an integration with Jira? So we can have the quant and the qual.
1, 2, 3.
Hey, Milton, I hear you now.
Okay.
There is not an integration today. However, Mural does have an API, and so it's completely feasible to tie APIs between tools based on the exportable fields that they have available. So yes, it is possible, and actually I'm looking into that. It's, MVP, right, Carl, was one thing. What's the one thing I could do at a time? And I could use Excel, and I could
you show people stuff and they want more.
Absolutely. I want more. I want automation too. But you start where you are. Go ahead, Milton. I heard you this time. You can unmute.
Sorry, I had a problem with mics. So I was trying to understand. So when you use the radar, you start clean for each retrospective that you do with the teams, right? So you don't keep accumulating the feedback from the other one because you're exporting just the data for that week,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, each week. So you can, if I scroll down, you will notice there's dates. And so each week's got dates. So we can sort then by those dates by team. I can do that up here too, right? I can do a sort by just November, and I could just do it for a couple of teams, right? That would be easy to do too. So so anything that's up here that's a slicer, I can use to accomplish that. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, feedback leading to change actually became possible, and this is where I think it helps everybody who's in Agile, or anybody outside of Agile too, if you were to use it, but it's the thinking of Agile really does a very good job of pushing control down, giving a lot of autonomy and saying, now go do work. But is it the right work? Is it the best work? Do you have what you need? We don't have a lot of that how and why with the typical measurement tools that we have, burn up, burn down, cumulative flow, etc. This gives us a combination of qualitative insights in a quantitative way to then validate against our metrics, against our KPIs, and have a full story, You're actually seeing the whole picture and not just a portion of it when you look at, numerical data alone. Because heck knows anybody ever seen a bar graph before? You can make it say whatever you want. So what we want to do is say, but is it true and why is it? And what do you need? Most important thing, what can we do to serve you? And this is where that psychological safety and empathy are such a critical part of the way we're working. And I know I'm speaking about style more than the agile substance. It's not in the manifesto that says lead with empathy or else. I just think that the best way to do it is to lead with empathy. And so when you build that relational trust and you demonstrate that there's psychological safety and you show them that their feedback, their ideas, their voice matters, it begins to change things very small but significantly. And for us, profoundly so, even in a short amount of time. Other questions?
Hi, Christian.
Hello.
No, it is quite interesting, but how long it took you to implement this team?
So this is this is 8. There were 7 versions of the Retrospective Radar that happened over 9 months. So when I rolled it, I created the Retrospective Radar, the first version, within just a few days. I rolled it out to 4. It was 4 teams at first, and we ran that for 2 weeks just to get feedback. And then I rolled it out to 26 teams in 2 weeks, and it's been going ever since.
What was the team's skills? Are we talking about the IT?
No, Agile sales.
Agile sales. Okay.
Right. So we're rolling this out to marketing too. So I think it's actually harder to work in Agile sales and marketing than it is in Agile IT because, basically I remember my first software as a service company, 60-foot whiteboard, 10-foot tall magnetic and all the stories on it. It was beautiful. And all they do is crank out code, right? Like unless there's a break fix, you just are heads down. And so being able to estimate to say, I know what I can do per week, you're just trying to get like perfect, right? Each week, trying to get a little bit better. The way Agile marketing, Agile sales, Agile HR works is it's interrupt driven. Your business partners, your clients, there's too much that comes at you that you could not possibly plan for. And so we have to have a model that says, while constraints are helpful, right, to time box for a week, we have a lot of flexibility and we want you to tell us the best way to do that. And the way I would say that, Christine, is like GPS. GPS, I type the destination in, I don't type in the route, right? Yeah. I say I want to end here at this time, and then it helps me figure that out. That's what we're trying to build. I don't want to prescribe, I want to describe. I don't want to tell them what to do, I want them to tell me what to do, because my job is to help them be successful.
Yes, exactly. That was my point, because when I work with IT, they start giving me the route, you see? But the business behavior is different. If I tell them, where we want to reach, let's find out how we will do it. Actually, they are more empathic, I think, No, it might be still too much for my team to start, but I might start using simple version.
It's simple on its basis. What I think what works about it is that anybody can do this. Anybody can figure out their own world of what they manage for themselves. You have agency over yourself. And this is just a prioritization tool. But the idea of what can your manager or an upline leader help with, and what does the organization need to know, right? Those doing the work are in the best position to help us add the greatest value to our clients, because they're closest to it. So we want that feedback to flow up so that we can adjust strategy, pivot, and learn. And eventually, you do this often enough and fast enough, you can actually not only meet market demand, you can start to anticipate market demand. And that's what we're aiming for, right? There is a speed function, but speed is the byproduct of a different way of thinking.
That's why it is great to be servant leader, but I don't want to be proactive. You see, the servant leader is, if there is an impediment, they tell me. No, I want to know actually as much as I can beforehand.
Yeah.
with the triggers and so yeah.
Yeah, it's all straightforward. That's why I think sharing this Mural template will be helpful because anybody can use it, right? Just like instantly. And it literally is there are the instructions on the side. So no matter who you are, if you just follow the instructions, it tells you what to do. It's not hard. And because there's people that, especially if you already know what retrospectives are, this is just a very easy way to combine your retrospective meeting and your planning meeting into one and get the best of both worlds, plus an exportable set of data. So, good question.
Yeah, this is good. No, and also thank you very much. I didn't know the Watson is available to us. Yeah.
Totally, IBM.com. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll look at it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions from you or anybody else in the room today before we end here in just a little bit? I'd really love to be able to answer and help you guys with where you are today. So open up your audio or type it into chat and I'll be happy to respond. Anybody? Okay.
Does this assume that what the team is asking for is something that management will agree to do?
No, it doesn't assume anything. In fact, the feedback can be anything. So one of the things you'll notice, I'm going to zoom in up here so you can see, Sheila, is we have 9 sets of possible options for status. Either we haven't started it, it's under consideration, which means there's more to it than your ask. We're going to see what it would take. In progress or in progress long term. Escalated, which means the person you put this in, maybe they put it in the manager circle of influence and like, I can't do that, but I have escalated it. Need more info. A lot of times they would write it in a way that it wasn't clear what they were asking for. So we go back and get that clarity. What's been completed, what's been declined or duplicate. Now the declined is a big one. One of the things is just because someone gave us the feedback doesn't mean we're required to act on it and do whatever they say. That's not what this is about. Instead, it's to say, give us your feedback so we can analyze and weigh that feedback and understand the business impact and what's possible. One of the things that's very common from a tooling perspective is that people will there's a tooling or a process that's a little bit antiquated that needs to be updated. But if you were to say, we'll solve that one thing, it breaks 3 other things, right? Because it's tied to 3 other systems. So sometimes it's not as easy as solving that thing. Sometimes you've got to do the due diligence to understand the impact down the line. So we reserve the right to always say, no, but here's why. Or sure, that's a great idea. Or we're going to think about it. Or we're not going to do that now, but we know that's a good idea. We're not in a place to be able to put the resources toward that at the moment or whatever. So by giving these 9 sets of options, this was our way of saying you're going to get an answer from us based on what we're able to do and capable of prioritizing, but you're going to hear back from us. And that's why we give the options here, because we're trying to show them, no, please don't, just because we said no, don't stop giving us feedback. Your next idea we may be able to say yes to. And it's that building of trust, right? Respect, openness, courage, empathy, trust. And when we can do that, then we begin to create a culture where they give us more and better feedback, and we can begin to act on more and more over time. Did that answer your question, Sheila?
So if they get a status of declined, is there an explanation that's also?
Yes.
And it's accessible to everyone?
Yeah, so this spreadsheet, it's just and we put it in Box, which is kind of like Dropbox or Google Drive. And so then the manager would say to his team or her team, let's say this manager, she has her team and she's going to go look at her team's feedback. And it turns out that there was feedback where someone had said, hey, we are thinking about that. And of course, this is just Latin placeholder, but they could then update this. So because the manager is on top of this and has this, they actually share this screen. They share this with the team. and talk about where their status is. So this is not hidden. This is published because we want the accountability to be high. We want them to know where their feedback is in status. And we keep a running total of all that feedback over all that time so that at any point in time we can see where things are. And our goal is to complete as much as possible, to say yes, but not always possible. And we have to just revisit some ideas after a while.
So I'm still not seeing in what you showed any place where they'd get an explanation for why the status was declined.
Not on this screen, in a conversation with their manager or with an executive or whatever. We have situations where there would be a team meeting and they're talking about, hey, for the feedback that you gave us, let's go through that. And again, this is that one team, this manager, she's coming here and she's able to show them the status of the overall feedback for that team over time. And then she can drill down and look at any piece of feedback that was given and tell them where that feedback is. So there is an opportunity to have a conversation about it, as well as create this high-level report that shows real time or near real time where their feedback is an aggregate. And then, of course, if you want to drill down to a specific piece of feedback, all you'd have to do is come down here and filter against it, and you'd be able to find it. So it's a conversation, I don't have a column to the right that says, here's where that's at. I will tell you that in the data table here, we've got what you're talking about. Notice I've got assigned to in category. So if we were to say that there's 5 people at the top that are responsible for X, Y, and Z, I could have a field that says that's assigned to John, Susie, Prakash, Siri. I could then have those people listed here and I could assign them and say that's assigned to so-and-so. If you want to know where that's at, this is the person to talk to. We haven't rolled that out, but that is something we've considered. Yes. What we're trying to do is ask better questions and have more engagement. We want to have the conversation rather than just the data standalone. We want the conversation because that's how you start getting the trust built and the conversations lead to better questions, and the better questions lead to understanding. So we want to improve by continuously asking those questions and providing that feedback. But we do publish it so the access is available. There's no hiding from the feedback. Did I answer your question?
It did, but I'm not really satisfied with the answer.
What would you like, Sheila?
Well, I still don't think you have a way to go back and look to see why something was declined if the thought process was correct and complete, because what I've noticed is a lot of times the same kind of question or issue comes up in multiple teams, especially as you say, if there's a cross system impact.
Yes.
And if you don't have that detail historically, every time it comes up, you're going to waste a lot of time going through the same exercise.
That is correct. And this tool doesn't have that baked in yet. But then again, one of the things I've pointed out, that MVP, you have to start somewhere. So we've started with what we could start. And so we're just in an MVP mindset. So no, it doesn't do everything we want. And I do want what you're asking for, which is why I have a status and a category so we can start to figure out those patterns and identify. I'm agreeing with you. Just not built yet, right? You start where you are and you build what you can. So that would be a fair representation of where we are.
Yeah, it's good as an MVP.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly where we are today. Okay, are there any other questions?
Wisdom management piece that was universal.
Explain.
Well, just as far, it's like, why did this happen? It's like, hey, this looks really familiar. It's that have we been here before moment? Why are we doing this again? I mean, everywhere, right? It's not uncommon.
No, it's not. And what I would say is, remember that we've got the 2 rings. So the influence is that first line of management, of leadership, right? But the second, the concern, what ends up happening is when this happens, Sheila, and this has happened many times, team 1, team 7, team 9 all keep saying basically the same thing, or at different times they're saying the same thing. One of the things that Watson Natural Language Processor does is it gives us the ability to look at patterns of text and data over time. So we could, even if the people weren't consciously aware that those 3 teams were doing that, the data would point to, oh, look, that keeps showing up again and again. And because of that, we then get to have a conversation. The second thing is that we do bring the leaders together once a month to say, hey, let's talk about the patterns. Let's talk about what we're seeing across and throughout squads so that we can address the systemic things that everybody's talking about. And sometimes the answer is not great. Sometimes if we went to get that solved and there are these 3 things in the way, great. We now have talking points to communicate back to all squads, including the ones who didn't say anything about it. Here's what's going on. This was some really great feedback. This is a pattern. We recognize this as an opportunity to improve. Due to circumstance A and B, we can't solve it until circumstance C is met. And once that happens, we agree with you. That's something we're going to do. It just can't be right now. Our focus is on A, B, and C right now. And what we're getting is that communication gap shortened because we're bringing them together consistently to have those conversations and then publishing our learnings. And we actually have I can't show it to you. We have an internal dashboard and an internal blog basically that we post the feedback and we show these changes. We show the status updates so that people have a way to go and just see it. And what we're trying to demonstrate is that transparency is definitely a part of the culture shift we want. And we're cognizant that we can't solve everything, but we know we want to communicate why and where we are on those changes or lack of changes, because it's both helpful to know.
I do think it's really good that you can see it across multiple teams.
Yep. It's been a game changer for us, frankly. Huge, because one of the things is, people say, well, how do we optimize this? And the first thing, I use the metaphor, they go, how do we make a better ladder to get out of the hole we're in? I said, well, the first thing I want to help you do is stop digging, right? So if we can stop digging, I don't have to build such a great ladder. I could take the effort that was expended in the wrong way and stop it. So that's free gain. And then I could take that effort and redirect it towards something that would be useful. Been hugely valuable to have that level of insight and honest, transparent conversation, because people are starting to see we don't have to reinvent that wheel. We can actually just, by reducing waste, we have free upside. And that's been a big game changer too. So we identify not the right activity, but the right outcomes. And we change the activities to align with the outcomes. And that's been part of the shift too. So in every organization, you've got your own challenges. And for us, some of these we've had to deal with just head on and go, yep, that's really hard. And here's what we're doing about it. And that's, long term. It's a long-term plan.
I think it's a common concern across larger enterprises. That you'll see that. I mean, I'm thinking about organizations where I've worked where you'd see the same thing across a dozen teams or more.
Yep.
But they'd be talking about the symptoms as they affected them. And I like
Bingo.
It gives you the overview.
And you just summed up this whole talk perfectly right there, right? That is a great way to say the net effect of what we're doing is we have change at scale. And so we scale all the way down to individual teams, down to an individual issue if we need to, but we also scale up organizationally. Everything we're doing here has to scale. So by doing it in a way that aggregates and visualizes, we have a way to go scale up where we need to and scale down where we need to. And it's that both and, the genius of the and, that we have found so valuable. So it's my hope that you guys would be able to leverage the Retrospective Radar and Mural or other tools as you see fit, and then take your own insight and then act on that. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is change things for the better. We're trying to create the cultural transparency to say what's possible when the people closest to the work are given the authority, the autonomy to help us get and deliver greater value. When we make that possible, everybody wins. So that's the rising tide that floats all boats. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And that is my wrap on how we're using qualitative data in a quantitative way using the Retrospective Radar.